It all began with a phone call, one of those that hits you out of nowhere, knocking you off balance. I was stretched out on the couch at home, half paying attention to some mindless crime documentary when my phone buzzed against the coffee table. Emily's name lit up on the screen, which normally wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary. But this time was different. She was supposed to be at work, giving a big presentation to a client, not calling me out of the blue. As I picked up the phone, I expected her voice to be light-hearted, maybe sharing a funny story from her day. Instead, her tone was tense, like she was forcing herself to speak. "Hey, Alex, we need to talk." Those 4 words were never a good sign. The last time she said them, we ended up in therapy for a few months because she accused me of being emotionally distant or something equally vague. But there was something different about her voice now, a shaky undertone she couldn't quite hide. It wasn't just annoyance or frustration, it was fear. "All right, talk," I said, sitting up and feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickling. "Not like this." "Not over the phone," she responded. Her breathing was heavy, like she'd been working herself up to this for a while. Before I could push her to explain, she hung up, leaving me with nothing but silence and a growing knot in my stomach. The hours that followed were pure torture. My mind raced through countless scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was she in trouble? Was it about us? I couldn't shake the sense that something had gone horribly wrong. But no amount of worrying could prepare me for what actually happened later that evening. When Emily finally came home, she wasn't alone. She walked in with a man I'd never seen before, a stranger who looked like he belonged in some outdated business catalog, wearing a stiff suit and sporting a nervous expression. Emily didn't meet my eyes, and this guy just stood there, shifting from foot to foot as if he wanted to vanish. "Who is this?" I demanded, my heart thudding in my chest. Emily took a step forward, and when she finally looked at me, there was no warmth in her eyes, only a cold, unyielding defiance. "This is Mark," she said flatly. "He's the man I've been seeing." Her words knocked the air out of me. For a moment, I was sure this was some twisted prank. But the look on Mark's face told me otherwise. He didn't look guilty or ashamed, just pitying. Like he was sorry for me, like I was the one who should have seen this coming. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the back of the couch for balance. "Wait, what?" I managed to choke out. Emily's gaze didn't waver. "We've been seeing each other for about a year." "A year." The word echoed in my mind like a taunt, mocking me for not putting the pieces together sooner. The late nights, the new friends, the sudden interest in her appearance, it had all been right in front of me, and I was too blind to see it. And now, here she was, throwing it all in my face. Emily's revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "A year?" I repeated, my voice barely more than a rasp. It felt like someone had hit the rewind button on the last 12 months of my life, and now all the red flags I had ignored were being shoved right in my face. "Yes, a year," she confirmed, her tone unnervingly calm, as if she had rehearsed this conversation countless times. Her gaze stayed cold, and there was no flicker of regret, only the hint of annoyance, like this whole confrontation was just an inconvenience she had to get through. I couldn't keep the anger from rising in my chest. "So, while I was working late, while I was trying to make things better between us, you were off with him?" I snapped, glaring at Mark, who had the decency to at least look uncomfortable. He just stood there, staring at the floor like a kid who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Emily crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed by my outburst. "Alex, don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be. You asked, and I told you. It's over, okay? It's been over for a long time, you just didn't want to see it." Her words hit me like a slap. Over? When had things ended? Was it when we took that weekend trip to reconnect and she seemed distant the whole time? Or was it every time I'd cooked her favorite meals, thinking it would bring back a spark, while she was out there building a whole other life with him? The realization that our marriage had been dead to her for a year crushed me, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the last decade we spent together. I could feel the fury swelling inside me, too strong to contain. My hand shot out to the kitchen counter, knocking over a vase. It crashed to the floor, shards scattering in all directions. For a brief moment, I saw Emily flinch, her face flashing with something that might have been fear. But just as quickly, her expression hardened back into that mask of indifference. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice cold and condescending. She stepped over the broken glass like it was nothing but a minor inconvenience. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to tell you the truth, finally." "No, Emily," I spat, taking a step toward her. "You didn't come here to tell me the truth. You came here to drop your little bombshell and walk away without facing the consequences. You think you can just bring your affair partner into my house, say you think you love him, and I'm supposed to just accept that?" She scoffed, crossing her arms tighter across her chest. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't try to turn me into some kind of villain. You were never around. You were always at work or lost in your own head. I needed more than you were willing to give. Mark understands me in ways you never could." She glanced at Mark, as if seeking some kind of validation, but he just kept his gaze fixed on the floor. The audacity of it all, the nerve she had to stand there and talk about needing more, like that justified the lies, the betrayal, pushed me over the edge. "So, you're destroying 2 marriages for what, Emily? A thrill? A fling? Or just because you can't face reality like a grown-up?" Emily rolled her eyes, her lips curling in disdain. "This isn't just some fling, Alex. I thought you would understand that by now." Emily's words felt like gasoline poured onto the fire raging inside me. "Understand?" I repeated, barely able to keep my voice from cracking. "What exactly am I supposed to understand, Emily? That you're in love with a married man? That you've been sneaking around behind my back for a year while I've been busting my ass trying to fix what I thought was still fixable?" She didn't even blink, just sighed and looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "Alex, I didn't come here for your approval. I came here to be honest, which is more than you've ever been with yourself." I couldn't believe the nerve. "Honest?" I spat out the word like it left a bad taste in my mouth. "You show up with this guy in tow and think that counts as honesty? You call this honesty? What, did you think you'd just waltz in here, confess your little affair, and we'd all sit down for tea and talk it out?" Emily shook her head, almost pityingly, as if I was too clueless to see the bigger picture. "Alex, if you really want the truth, then here it is, you haven't been present in this marriage for a long time. You were emotionally checked out, obsessed with work, and frankly, I got tired of waiting for you to come back." Her voice was like ice, and her words felt rehearsed, like she had been crafting this explanation in her head for months. "Mark's wife found out about us," she continued, her tone matter-of-fact. "That's why I had to bring him here. She knows everything. Mark's wife." The words hit me like a gut punch. "So, he's married too," I muttered, the full weight of this twisted situation sinking in. It was bad enough that Emily had lied to me, but now I was being dragged into the fallout of another couple's broken marriage. Every layer I peeled back just made it worse. "And you," I said, my voice quivering with disgust, "are the other woman." Emily crossed her arms again, looking more irritated than ashamed. "Stop trying to paint me as some sort of homewrecker, Alex. It's not that simple. You weren't there for me, and Mark, he gets me in ways you never did. This isn't just about sneaking around, it's about finding someone who actually cares." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh from escaping my lips. "Finding someone who actually cares? Are you kidding me? If he cared so much, then why is he standing there like a scared kid, wishing he could disappear? And why does this sound like just another excuse for why none of this is your fault?" She glanced at Mark, who still hadn't uttered a single word, then turned back to me, her face tightening in anger. I'm not going to stand here and be made out to be the bad guy. You drove me to this, Alex. I needed more than you were willing to give, and Mark was there. I'm not going to apologize for finding happiness. Happiness? I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. Dragging him into our home, parading him in front of me, this is happiness to you? For a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that might have been regret. But just as quickly, her expression hardened again. You don't get it, Alex. You never did. And there it was, the final knife twist. The woman I'd thought I knew, the life I'd thought we had, it all felt like a carefully constructed illusion that had just come crashing down around me. I stood there, stunned by Emily's twisted sense of logic. It was like she had rewritten the entire history of our marriage in her head, casting herself as the neglected wife and me as the distant, unfeeling husband. And now, she was acting like I was the villain for being angry about her betrayal. My head was spinning, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. So, you're telling me this whole time, I was just too blind to see you slipping away, and you think that makes what you did okay? I asked, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. She rolled her eyes like I was too dense to understand. It's not about right or wrong, Alex. It's about what I need. What I deserve. And honestly, I stopped thinking about your needs a long time ago. I felt my pulse quicken, my anger bubbling over. Deserve? You think you deserve to blow up 2 marriages and then play the victim? I turned toward Mark, who had inched closer to the door, his face pale and sweaty. And you, did you think you could just waltz into my life, into my house, and what, take my place? Mark flinched at my words, finally looking up at me, his face creased with what I guessed was supposed to be remorse. But behind it, I saw something else, maybe fear, maybe the dawning realization of just how badly this whole thing was playing out. He opened his mouth to speak, but Emily cut him off before he could utter a word. Alex, this isn't about you and him, she snapped, stepping closer to me, her expression hard. It's about us. It's about me wanting more than what you could give, and finding it somewhere else. Just face it, you couldn't keep up. You never could. Her words stung like salt in a wound. It was one thing for her to cheat, but to stand there, tearing me down in my own home. I felt a rage so fierce that I could hardly see straight. I took a step forward, and for a moment, Mark shrank back like he thought I might hit him. But instead, I turned my attention back to Emily. You want more? Fine. Take it, I said through gritted teeth. Take whatever you think you need, and get out. But don't stand here and act like I'm the one who failed. You're the one who couldn't be honest, who couldn't face the hard times, who thought that sneaking around was easier than trying to fix things. Emily's face twisted into a sneer, her lips curling as she crossed her arms. Oh, don't act like you're some saint, Alex. You hid behind your work, buried yourself in your own little world. I got tired of waiting for you to wake up. My breath caught in my throat, the words hitting me harder than I'd expected. Because maybe, in some twisted way, there was a grain of truth buried in there. But that didn't excuse what she'd done, not in the slightest. It didn't excuse the way she'd lied to my face for an entire year, pretending everything was fine while she built a life with someone else. I was about to fire back when she dropped the next bombshell, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You don't even know the half of it, Alex. Mark's wife found out everything. She's been threatening to blow this up for weeks, and I couldn't keep hiding it. The air seemed to rush out of the room. Mark's wife, I repeated slowly, my mind struggling to catch up. So, not only did you cheat on me, but you also got involved with another married guy. And now his wife is about to make sure everyone knows. She looked away, her jaw set, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She already knows, Alex. That's why I had to bring Mark here. I thought it would be better if you heard it from me before she went public with everything. For a moment, I couldn't even find the words. It felt like my brain was short-circuiting, trying to process just how deeply she had dragged me into this mess. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore, it was about the entire life we had built, and how she had shattered it beyond repair. "You're unbelievable," I finally muttered, shaking my head. "And you're a coward, Emily. You didn't bring him here to spare my feelings. You did it because you're afraid of dealing with the fallout." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't deny it. She just stood there, her silence speaking louder than any argument. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen and saw Lisa's name. Emily's best friend. The one who'd always seemed a little too sympathetic when she'd check in on me. Without a second thought, I grabbed the phone, my hands still trembling. "Alex, I'm so sorry," Lisa's voice crackled through the speaker. There was a hesitation, a heaviness, like she was carrying a secret she didn't know how to share. I need to tell you something. I've known about Mark. I've known for a while." A fresh wave of betrayal surged through me. "How long, Lisa?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "How long have you known about Emily's affair?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear her swallow nervously on the other end. "Months," she finally admitted. "Maybe longer. I didn't know how to tell you, Alex. I didn't think it was my place." I let out a bitter laugh, the kind that happens when you've reached the point of no return. "And it wasn't your place to tell me that my wife was sneaking around behind my back? That she was planning on blowing up 2 marriages?" I felt the room start to spin again. "You're supposed to be her best friend. Did she tell you she was seeing a married man?" Lisa hesitated, then her voice dropped to a near whisper. "Yes. And there's more, Alex. Emily's done this before." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" I barely managed to croak out. 7 years ago, she continued, her voice trembling with regret. "Emily had an affair with another married man. His wife found out and contacted me because she was desperate for answers. Emily begged me to keep it quiet and swore it was just a one-time thing, that she was going to work on your marriage." My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. "You mean to tell me she's been doing this for years?" I practically shouted into the phone. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I thought she had changed," Lisa replied, her voice cracking. "She said she was going to make things right with you. She convinced me it was in the past. But, after what's happened with Mark, I can't keep quiet anymore. I don't think she ever stopped, Alex. I think she's just gotten better at hiding it." The air felt thick and suffocating as the truth settled over me. 7 years. That was when I first started feeling like something was off between Emily and me. I had dismissed it back then as stress or rough patches, telling myself that all marriages go through ups and downs. But all along, Emily had been living a double life, deceiving me while I tried to keep us afloat. I gripped the phone tighter, struggling to steady my voice. "Why now, Lisa? Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't stand to see you blindsided like this anymore," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I thought maybe Emily had grown up, but after seeing her with Mark and how she's treating you. I know I was wrong. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't change anything," I shot back, my voice icy. "You kept her secret for years, and now look where we are. She's been lying to me since before I can even remember." I hung up, my hand shaking as I tossed the phone back onto the counter. A sense of numbness spread through me, blending with the rage simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't just that Emily had cheated, it was the depth of the deception, the years of my life that had been stolen by her lies. And now, all of it was out in the open, and I was left standing in the wreckage. I turned back to Emily, who was still standing there, her face unreadable. "So, this is who you are," I said quietly, the words dripping with disgust. "You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Lying to my face while you played house with other men. She didn't deny it. Instead, she just crossed her arms and shrugged. You don't know what it's like to feel trapped, Alex. You don't know what it's like to feel like you're slowly dying inside because your husband isn't there for you. That's your excuse? I asked, my voice trembling with fury. You think that justifies the lies, the affairs, the wreckage you've left behind? I shook my head. No, Emily. You're not the victim here. You're just a coward who was too selfish to even try to fix what was broken. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, but there was a flicker of something else there now, fear, perhaps, or maybe the realization that this time, she had gone too far. As the reality of Emily's betrayal continued to sink in, I knew I needed more answers. There was one person who could fill in the gaps, someone who had lived through the same wreckage that Emily and Mark had created. I scrolled through my contacts and found the number Lisa had given me, Mark's wife, Karen. My thumb hesitated over the call button for a moment, but then I pressed it. It rang a few times before a tired, shaky voice answered. Hello. Hi, this is Alex, Emily's husband, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I think we need to talk. There was a pause on the other end, then a deep sigh. Yes, we do, Karen replied, her tone laced with exhaustion. I was wondering if you'd reach out. We agreed to meet at a small cafe just outside of town. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I needed to know the whole truth, what Emily and Mark had done, and how long Karen had known about it. When I arrived, she was already sitting by the window, her fingers wrapped around a half-empty cup of coffee. She looked up as I approached, and her face showed the kind of weariness that only comes from being utterly betrayed. Alex, she said quietly as I sat down across from her. Thanks for coming. Thanks for agreeing to meet, I replied, managing a weak smile. There was a brief silence, the weight of everything hanging heavily between us. I didn't know how to start, so I just jumped right in. How long have you known about them? I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. Karen sighed and looked down at her coffee. I found out a couple of months ago, she admitted. I started noticing little things, Mark acting strange, coming home late, being glued to his phone. Then one day, I saw a message from Emily, and everything fell into place. My jaw tightened as I tried to process this new piece of the puzzle. And you didn't confront him right away? I did, she said, her voice hardening. He admitted it. He said it had been going on for about a year and that Emily made him feel understood in ways I didn't anymore. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. It was like he'd been brainwashed. He talked about her like she was his salvation, like she had rescued him from a life he couldn't stand. My hands tightened into fists on the table. And Emily said the same damn thing to me. She acted like our marriage was some kind of prison, like I'd somehow forced her to cheat. Karen's gaze hardened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. It's disgusting, isn't it? How they try to make us the villains in their story. Like it's our fault they couldn't stay faithful. I nodded, a heavy silence settling over us. Lisa told me Emily's done this before, I said quietly. Apparently, there was another affair 7 years ago, with a different married guy. I had no idea. I don't even know how long she's been lying to me. Karen's expression softened, and I could see the sympathy in her eyes. When I found out about Emily, I had this feeling, like she wasn't new to this. She was too calculated, too sure of herself. It's like she knew exactly how to get Mark hooked, like it was all just a game to her. She brought him into my house, I said, my voice trembling with anger. She looked me in the eye and told me she thought she loved him, right there in front of me. It's like I was just an obstacle in her way. Karen's face fell, and she reached across the table, placing a hand over mine. I'm so sorry, Alex. No one deserves to be treated like that. We sat there in shared silence for a moment, the weight of our mutual betrayal pulling us together. We had both been lied to, used by the same people who claimed to love us, and now we were left to pick up the pieces of our broken lives. So, what are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you going to try and work things out with him? Karen sighed, her gaze drifting out the window. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to just walk away and never look back. But, we've been together a long time. It's hard to just throw that away, even if it feels like everything's been a lie. The idea of trying to fix anything with Emily felt absurd to me. She hadn't shown a shred of remorse, hadn't even tried to apologize. It was like she had already moved on and I was just the loose end she needed to tie up. Emily didn't even pretend to be sorry, I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. She acted like I was the reason she did this, like I drove her to cheat. I'm done with her. Karen looked at me then, her eyes full of understanding. They made their choices, Alex. They can try to shift the blame all they want, but this is on them, not us. Her words struck a chord deep inside me, a flicker of strength I hadn't felt in days. She was right. We weren't the ones who lied and cheated, Emily and Mark did that. They had made their choices, and now they'd have to live with the consequences. Thank you, I said quietly. I needed to hear that. Karen offered me a small, sad smile. We're in this together, Alex. We'll get through it, somehow. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a burden had been lifted. Emily's betrayal still cut deep, but I wasn't alone in my pain anymore. Karen understood in a way no one else could, and somehow, that made the weight just a little bit easier to bear. I left the cafe with a newfound resolve, a sense that I was no longer drowning in the chaos Emily had created. The drive back home was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Emily's car was gone. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd actually taken my demands seriously and left. The front door was unlocked, and as I stepped inside, the house felt cold and empty. The kind of emptiness that sinks into your bones. It wasn't just Emily's absence, it was as though the life we had built here had been ripped away, leaving nothing but hollow rooms and shattered memories. I glanced around and saw boxes near the door, filled with clothes, books, and random odds and ends. Emily had started packing up her things. I didn't bother looking through them, I didn't want to see any more reminders of what had been. I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw it, a single envelope sitting on the coffee table, my name scribbled across the front in Emily's familiar handwriting. I debated throwing it straight into the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. I tore open the envelope, and the paper inside crinkled loudly in the silence of the house. Emily's handwriting stared back at me, every letter neat and careful, like she had taken the time to craft this final piece of our story. Alex, the letter began, I know there's nothing I can say that will make this right. I never intended to hurt you, but I know that's a meaningless excuse now. A part of me honestly believed I could keep both lives going without causing any harm, but I realize how selfish and stupid that was. I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, for betraying you, for not being brave enough to tell you the truth sooner. I hope one day you can understand why I did what I did, even if you never forgive me. My grip tightened on the letter, my anger rekindling. Understand? What was there to understand? That she'd destroyed our marriage for a thrill, a spark she couldn't find with me. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. This wasn't about understanding Emily's reasons, it was about the fact that she had ruined everything we had built together, and for what? To feel something different. Something more exciting. I crumpled the note and tossed it onto the pile of boxes by the door. Her so-called apology felt hollow, just another way for her to walk away without having to face the full weight of what she had done. She was already gone in her mind, and I wasn't going to let her keep taking up space in mine. With Emily's things mostly packed up, the reality of what came next hit me all at once. There was no undoing this, no saving what was left. It was time to make it official and start the process of disentangling our lives from each other. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at the name of a divorce lawyer I'd heard good things about. My thumb hovered over the call button for a moment, my stomach tightening at the thought of what I was about to do. But there was no turning back now. Emily had made her choice, and it was time for me to make mine. I pressed the button and brought the phone to my ear, listening as it rang. After a few moments, a crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. I explained my situation in brief, detached terms, as if I were recounting someone else's story. The lawyer asked a few questions, mostly logistical, and assured me that we'd be able to get the ball rolling quickly. By the time I hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the first real step toward reclaiming my life, the first move in closing the chapter that Emily had torn apart. The rest of the day, I stayed busy packing up whatever was left of Emily's things. I shoved clothes into boxes without bothering to fold them neatly, tossed trinkets and photos into bags, and stacked it all near the front door. The process was almost therapeutic, like I was slowly purging the remnants of her betrayal from my life. By the time I finished, the living room was cluttered with boxes, each one a small piece of the life we had once shared but would never get back. I called a moving company and arranged for them to pick up the boxes the next day. I didn't even know where Emily was staying, but Lisa had given me an address, so I sent everything there. It felt fitting somehow, Emily walking out of my life without a word, and me tying up the loose ends she had left behind. That night, as the last box was loaded onto the truck, I stood on the doorstep and watched the taillights disappear down the street. The house was mine again. Empty, quiet, but mine. I walked back inside and closed the door, letting the silence wash over me like a blanket. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. There were no more lies lurking in the corners, no more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Emily was gone, and I was still standing. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sank onto the couch, staring out the window at the darkening sky. It was over. The life I had known was gone, but I wasn't. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild, to find something that was real, something that belonged solely to me. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. With Emily gone and her belongings finally out of the house, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, little by little. It wasn't that the pain had vanished, far from it, but I could breathe a little easier knowing that there were no more secrets lurking in the shadows. I needed a fresh start, and that began with reclaiming my space. I walked through each room, making changes, removing anything that reminded me of Emily. I repainted the walls a calming shade of blue, tore down the old curtains, and tossed out the throw pillows she had insisted we keep. The couch, the one she'd loved to curl up on with a book, was the first thing I replaced. I bought a new one, sleek, modern, something that felt like it belonged to me and no one else. It was therapeutic, really, watching the house slowly transform from a shrine of our shared past to a space that felt like it was truly mine again. I cleared out the guest room and turned it into a small studio, setting up an easel and buying some paints. It wasn't much, just a small attempt to rekindle an old hobby from my college days, but it felt good to do something for myself for a change. Each brushstroke was messy and imperfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. I started making other changes too. I reconnected with some old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because life with Emily had become too overwhelming. They welcomed me back without hesitation, and it was like breathing fresh air for the first time after being stuck in a smoky room. I went to the gym more often, pushing myself harder each day. The physical exhaustion was a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil still simmering inside me. It wasn't about escaping the pain, but rather facing it head-on, letting it push me to be stronger. I even started spending more time outside, little things like taking a book to the park and finding a quiet spot under the shade of an oak tree. I'd lose myself in stories that weren't my own, giving my mind a break from the relentless loop of memories and questions about what I could have done differently. It was a slow process, but little by little, I could feel the anger and sadness start to fade. Not completely, but enough to give me a glimmer of hope that maybe, one day, I'd truly move on. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, expecting a text from one of my friends or a work notification, but instead, it was a message from Karen. I hadn't spoken to her since our meeting at the cafe, though I had thought about her often. There was something about the connection we shared, two people walking through the same hell, trying to find a way out, that lingered in my mind. "Hey, Alex. I've been thinking. Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? Just to catch up," the message read. I stared at the words for a moment, a small smile slowly forming on my lips. It had been weeks since we'd last spoken, but not a day had gone by that I hadn't thought about our conversation, about the raw honesty we shared in that little cafe. I typed back a quick response, "I'd love to. How about this weekend?" Her reply came almost immediately. "Sounds perfect," smiley face. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of excitement. It wasn't a date, not exactly. It was two people who understood each other's pain, sharing a moment that wasn't defined by betrayal or loss. But as the weekend approached, I found myself feeling a bit nervous, and I knew that deep down, it mattered more to me than I wanted to admit. Saturday arrived, and I spent a little too long in front of the mirror, making sure I didn't look like I'd just rolled out of bed. When I arrived at the cafe, Karen was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked up and gave me a warm smile as I walked over. "Hey, Alex," she said, her voice light, almost relieved. "I'm glad you came." "Of course," I replied, matching her smile. "It's good to see you, Karen." We started with small talk, easing into the conversation naturally. We spoke about hobbies, books, even the art classes she'd taken up recently. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Karen had a dry humor I hadn't noticed before, and her eyes would light up whenever she spoke about something she loved. For a while, it felt like we weren't two people who had been betrayed, but just two people, enjoying each other's company. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to Emily and Mark. It wasn't painful the way it used to be, it felt more like discussing a story that no longer had power over us. "How are you holding up?" Karen asked, genuine concern in her eyes. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. For the first time in a long time, I feel free." She smiled, her eyes softening. "Me too. It still hurts, but it's different now. It's like I'm not carrying it with me everywhere I go." We sat in silence for a moment, just enjoying the peace of the moment. As I looked at Karen, I realized that maybe this was what healing felt like. Not some grand epiphany or sudden joy, but quiet moments like this, where you finally feel like you can breathe again. Life was slowly starting to feel normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. I wasn't waiting for the next bombshell to drop, wasn't scanning every conversation for signs of betrayal. I could finally focus on my own life, on rebuilding from the wreckage Emily had left behind. But then, just when I was starting to feel like I was moving forward, my past showed up on my doorstep. It was late, and I had just finished painting a section of the guest room when there was a knock at the door. My first thought was Emily, coming back to cause more drama. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her, it was Mark. He looked terrible. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion like he hadn't slept in days. He stood there on the doorstep, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and for a moment, he just stared at me as if he wasn't even sure why he'd come. A wave of anger surged through me at the sight of him. This was the man who had stood in my living room, the man who had helped destroy my marriage, and now he had the nerve to show up at my house. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice cold, the edge unmistakable. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Alex. I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" Every instinct told me to slam the door in his face, to tell him to get the hell off my property. But there was something in his expression, an emptiness, a kind of desperation that I hadn't seen before. Against my better judgment, I stepped back, leaving the door open just enough for him to come in if he dared. He hesitated, then walked inside, glancing around like he half expected Emily to appear at any moment. I led him to the living room, where we stood awkwardly, the silence between us heavy with tension. "Well?" I asked, crossing my arms. "What is it you want?" Mark took a shaky breath, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Emily left me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She walked out 2 days ago. Packed up all her things and just left." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. "She left you?" I repeated, the words sounding strange in my own voice. "After everything she put us through, she just walked out." He nodded, his eyes brimming with a mixture of despair and shame. "She didn't even say goodbye," he confessed. "Just packed up and disappeared. I thought she loved me, Alex. I thought what we had was real. I couldn't help it." A bitter laugh escaped me, echoing through the empty room. "And what did you expect me to say to that, Mark? That I'm sorry she used you too? That I feel bad for you because she's done to you what she did to me?" Mark flinched at my words, his face crumpling as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I'm the last person you'd want to help, but I needed you to know. She didn't just hurt you, Alex. She hurt me too." The anger I felt simmered just below the surface, but beneath it, there was something else, a strange sense of understanding. As much as I hated to admit it, Mark was right. Emily had hurt us both, had used both of us to fill whatever void she was running from. She had made us both feel special, made us both believe that we were what she needed. And then, when she'd had enough, she left us in the wreckage without a second thought. "What did you think was going to happen, Mark?" I asked, my voice softer now, though the disdain was still there. "Did you think she was going to be different for you? That she was suddenly going to become someone she's not?" He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know," he whispered. "I guess I thought we were special. That she really loved me." I sighed, the exhaustion of the past weeks catching up to me all at once. "Emily doesn't love anyone, Mark," I said, my tone resigned. "She loves the idea of being loved. She loves the thrill, the chase. But once she has what she wants, she loses interest. That's who she is." He looked up at me, his eyes hollow and filled with a hopelessness that I recognized all too well. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How do I move on from this?" I studied him for a long moment. This man had been my enemy, the one who had helped tear my life apart. But now, standing in front of me, he was just another victim of Emily's selfishness, another person left behind in the rubble of her choices. "You pick up the pieces," I said finally, my voice tired but firm. "You start over. You learn from it, and you don't let it define you. You move on, Mark. It's the only thing you can do." He nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said, his voice cracking. "I know it doesn't mean much, but I am. I wish I could take it back." I nodded back, though I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Maybe one day I'd be able to forgive him, maybe one day the anger would fade. But that day wasn't today. "You should go," I said, stepping back and opening the door for him. Mark took one last glance at me before nodding and walking out, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there for a moment, the silence settling around me once more, and felt something shift inside. Mark's visit had reopened wounds I thought I was ready to close, but it had also brought something else, a strange sense of closure. Emily was gone, and whatever hold she had over Mark, or over me, was gone too. I walked back into the living room, looking around at the changes I had made, the new beginnings I had created for myself. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need anything from Emily anymore. Not her apology, not her explanations, not even her regret. I was finally free. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life settled into a steady rhythm. There were no more unexpected knocks at the door, no more bombshells waiting to drop. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to one crisis after another, I was living my life on my own terms. The house had transformed into something new, something that reflected who I was now, not who I had been with Emily. It was as if I'd shed an old skin and was finally free to rebuild from the ground up. I continued making small changes, tweaking every corner of the house until it felt like mine. The pictures of Emily and me were replaced with new artwork, bold, abstract pieces that spoke of possibility rather than memories. I bought new dishes, replaced the bedsheets, and even started tackling projects I had put off for years. The process was therapeutic, a way of reclaiming my space, my life, and my sense of self. Then one day, as I sat on the couch sipping coffee, my phone buzzed. It was Karen again. "Hey, Alex. How have you been? Want to catch up over coffee?" The simple invitation brought a smile to my face. We had kept in touch off and on since our last meeting, our conversations drifting toward deeper and more personal topics. There was a quiet understanding between us, a shared history of betrayal that bonded us in a way that was hard to explain. I typed a quick reply, "Absolutely. How about this Saturday?" When Saturday came, I felt that familiar nervousness creep in, but this time it wasn't about fear or hesitation, it was anticipation. It wasn't a date, not officially. But there was an undeniable connection between us, something deeper than just shared heartache. When I walked into the cafe, Karen was already seated at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked up and smiled as I approached, and for a moment, the world felt a little lighter. "Hey, Alex," she said warmly. "It's good to see you." "Good to see you too," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "How've you been?" For a while, we talked about the little things, work, hobbies, life. I found myself laughing at her dry humor and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her latest art project. It felt easy, natural. Eventually, though, the conversation drifted back to Emily and Mark. Not in a painful way, but as a means of reflecting on how far we'd come. "You seem different," Karen observed, her gaze steady. "Lighter, somehow." I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. "I guess I finally let it go," I admitted. "The anger, the resentment, even the questions. I realized I don't need answers from Emily anymore. She's not a part of my life, and I'm okay with that." Karen smiled, a hint of relief crossing her features. "I'm glad to hear that," she said softly. "I think I'm getting there too. It still hurts sometimes, but it doesn't feel as heavy." There was a comfortable silence between us, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. As I looked at Karen, I realized that maybe this was what healing looked like, not some grand moment of closure, but these quiet, shared experiences that made life feel a little more whole each day. "Alex," she began, her voice hesitant, "do you ever think about what's next? I mean, for you. For us." I met her gaze, feeling a spark of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time, hope. Reaching across the table, I took her hand in mine, a small but deliberate gesture. "I don't know what's next," I admitted honestly. "But I'd like to find out, one step at a time." She squeezed my hand, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Me too," she said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty that matched my own. We spent the rest of the afternoon there, talking, laughing, sharing stories of our lives before the chaos had taken over. When we finally left the cafe, the sun was setting, painting the sky in warm shades of pink and orange. I walked Karen to her car, and before she left, she turned to me, a softness in her expression that made my heart feel lighter. I'm glad we're in this together, Alex, she said. We're stronger because of it. I smiled back, feeling that same sense of strength in my own chest. Me too, Karen, I replied. Me too. As she drove away, I stood there for a moment, watching her taillights disappear down the street. The air was cool, the evening quiet, and I took a deep breath, letting a sense of peace settle over me. I knew I was still healing, still learning to live with the scars that Emily had left behind, but I wasn't alone. I had survived the storm, and now I was walking a new path, one that I could shape on my own terms. Emily had tried to destroy me, had tried to take everything I was and leave me with nothing. But she hadn't succeeded. I was still here, still standing, and now I was moving forward. As I walked back to my car, I felt hope swell inside me, a hope that wasn't tied to anyone else but myself. The past was behind me, and the future, whatever it held, was mine to shape. I didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out.